Well, here we are, early September, and probably in your church and in mine, this is often a time when churches put on a little special push to bring in some new people and attract some new members. Maybe they put a banner out on the front yard and say, "Are you searching for something? Well, come search with us." Or we're having a sermon series on how to have a happy family and get along in your marriage or something. Come here. I defy you to put this on a sign out in front of your church in an attempt to attract new people. I take you to our gospel for today. He called the crowd with his disciples and he said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and the sake of the gospel will save it." Well, it would have been a big enough challenge if Jesus had gone to the cross alone. It's been a shock in this gospel to hear Jesus say, "I'm going to go to Jerusalem and I'm going to be arrested and I'm going to suffer and I'm going to be crucified." That would have been enough to talk about God crucified. And yet, in today's gospel, he says, hey, there's a cross that fits your back just fine. And in fact, the cross is not optional equipment for my disciples. If you want to be my disciple, you got to take up your cross and follow. I was a young pastor in my first church, and things weren't going that well. And I was pouring out my heart to an older pastor, a mentor of mine, and telling him about the unfairness of the congregation and the difficulties I'd had and the things that I'd tried and had failed. And he sought to reassure me, and I remember he put his hand across the table and he took mine and he said, "Son, I really believe that God will never let anything happen to you that's worse than what God allowed to happen to his own son. Do you feel better now?" Some years later, I was in some difficulty at another church. We had a stormy board meeting. And the next morning after the board meeting, I was sitting in my office. And I was going back over the bad board meeting of the night before. And I was thinking, you should have waited at least a year before you did anything. That's one of the rules, I think. And you should have gotten your soldiers behind you before you went into battle. You never let the laity vote on anything that you don't know how they're going to vote before you ask for the vote. I should have counted the votes before the meeting went. I should have done this and that. And I turned from that to preparation for my sermon. And as Providence would have it, it was this passage from Mark. And one of these many passages in Mark's gospel where, we say something and then Jesus says something and then we say something and Jesus says something and then we say, "Let's kill him." One of those passages. And suddenly, it was like the heavens opened, this dove descended, there was a voice, and said to me there in my misery, now what do you not get about the word cross? The whole Gospel of Mark is just cross, cross, cross. And yet you are surprised. You were blindsided by cross. You're stunned. Do not accuse Jesus of false advertising. Right up front he says, if you're going to walk down this path, it's a cruciform way. Wow, I think in the present age, North American Christianity, we need to hear this word It's a word I'm not guilty of pronouncing half as much as Mark's gospel does. That conflict, that struggle, that rejection, worse, cross, is not a surprise. When you say the things Jesus says, and you do the things Jesus does, it's cross. In my Episcopal suite in Birmingham, Alabama, when I was bishop there with a Methodist, an older pastor had given me a mimeographed copy of Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. And it was an actual original of the letter that was copied and distributed to Birmingham clergy a couple of days after King wrote his letter. And I had that framed. I had that in my office. I had to look at that every time I went in that office. Why? Because Martin Luther King wrote that letter to one of my predecessors in the episcopacy in Birmingham, Alabama, to somebody who looks like me. And he wrote that letter to good white liberals like me. And he said to them, I am sorry, but we cannot wait forever. I am sorry, he said in effect. There is no way for centuries of white domination and white privilege to give way without there being some pain. Jesus put it, there's no way to walk with me unless you walk the way of the cross. The cross. It's not a bad back or a difficult to get along with mother-in-law. The cross is what you get for walking with Jesus. Furthermore, Jesus says, it's how you'll know you're walking with Jesus if there's a cross. But note that he also says, those who lose their lives, those who throw away their lives and what they got for my sake and the gospel, they will save. They will be saved. This word of the cross is good news. That the way of the cross, walked with Jesus, it becomes not a impossible, terrible way, but a way that leads to life abundantly. I was there in the hospital when she gave birth to a child. And we could tell from the way the nurses were acting, there was some kind of issue. And sure enough, the doctor came in shortly, and he said, there is a problem with your baby. And I said, what kind of problem? He said, well, this child is born with a condition that affects brain development and affects motor skills. The child has a little respiratory issue, and maybe he said, if we just sort of step back and let nature take its course, the problem will be solved. Well, the husband spoke up and said, this baby's not a problem. We have prayed for this child, and this is a gift. And she said, when you think about it, the lives that we've had, the privileges we've enjoyed, this makes a whole lot of sense that we would be given a child like this. The doctor spoke up and said, studies show that couples who keep these children suffer a high rate of marital stress and separation. And she said, well, you don't know us, we won't. And the doctor left. And I tell you, when they walked out of that hospital 4 days later, you could hear the cross coming down the hall. You could hear it going out the front door, down the steps. And the amazing thing was, what they bore was not a burden, but in the redemptive hands of God was a divine vocation. It was a blessing that they who the world might look as losing were gaining. I think behind today's gospel is a truth. Only the life you lose because it's taken by God for God's purposes, that is the life God saves. Amen.